when the alarm bells are going off in your mind and you're feeling uncertainty in your mind, or you're feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of your dreams and you're doubting whether or not you can achieve it, that's your signal that you're onto something. That's the signal that you're pushing right up against the edge of your comfort zone. And if you push just a little bit further, you're going to grow one step closer to your dream. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to Flow Over Fear. And today I want to talk about some of the ways in which fear shows up for us in our lives and how we can turn that into an opportunity. Yeah, that's right. Fear, I feel like, can be an opportunity. And I say that a lot, that, one of the primary reasons that fear gets to us and we have, this bad relationship with fear is because we think it's an enemy and we try to fight against it. And when we're fighting against it, we're always going to lose because it's always going to be there. We can't ignore it. We can't just suppress it. We can't push it down. It's an emotion. It's a thing to be felt that is backed by millions of years of evolution. And so we can't just destroy that in 20 minutes of trying to, I'm going to get rid of this fear. We can't do that. No. But instead, we can look at it, sometimes these fears, as opportunities. And I want to start by sharing one of the first times that I was able to change my relationship with fear. And this happened when I first got sober, when I first walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, for me, as I've talked about on the show many times, alcohol was a way for me to try to escape my fears and anxiety. It was my solution. It was my way of lifting my fears from me. When I drank, they all went away. My panic, my fears, my anxiety, all of that stuff went away. Alcohol was my weapon of choice in the war against fear. But was I really, really taking away my fears? No, I was just pouring so much alcohol over it that they were suppressed for a while. But those fears, those anxieties, that panic, the second I would get sober, man, they came back in massive force to tell me, to scream at me, the same things that they were trying to scream at me before, and I'll tell you about those and what it was trying to tell me in a second. But I want to convey to you that that's what we do when we're fighting against fear. We're really suppressing something that is trying to convey to us something. And oftentimes we have to listen to it. And that's where we get into that first evolution of our experience with fear, which is we go from fighting it to facing it. And I went from fighting it to facing it when I stepped into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and I finally got sober. I finally admitted that I had enough and that I no longer had control of my life. And interestingly, facing fear is an act of surrender. It's no longer fighting fear, but saying, look, I'm done fighting. Let me understand you. Let me understand what you're trying to convey to me. Let me know that you're going to be a part of my life, and let's try to work together so that how I feel this fear or this anxiety or this panic is not so intense, but I can respond accordingly. And of course that takes work. Of course that takes community. That act of healing, I'm not going to pretend it's an easy process. It's not. It's really not. That act of facing fear, which is healing, is not an easy process. But if you have the right set of conditions, if you have the willingness, the vulnerability, the responsibility, and the community. Those are the important parts that you need in order to heal and face your fear and heal. And for me, when I walked into the rooms of AA, I was seeing fear as an obstacle in my life. And that's really the problem that we have is, we can't rationalize, or we can't think of how we can see something, this thing that makes us wildly uncomfortable, fear. We can't see it as an opportunity. We can't see the opportunity in it when we're fighting against it. And so that's the problem, is we often see it as an obstacle to our achievement. And then the pain that we feel from that, how we experience that is we start to get frustrated because we give up on our dreams too soon, or our goals, or we don't make forward progress, or we start to feel shame about the way we reacted, or our behaviors in certain ways, because we aren't making progress toward our goals, or things like that. And so when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's how I felt. I felt fear was an obstacle for me. But as I started working through the steps of AA, and this is not a promotion of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's just, this is how it worked for me and why it worked. I went through, the steps of AA, the first 4 steps, the first ones being more philosophical, admitting that I was powerless, that I didn't have any more control over my life, reconnecting or reshaping, admitting that there was a God or a higher power that was looking out for me, and committing myself to accepting that higher power. And yeah, that's a big one for people. But the 4th step is where we start getting into action. And that action included a lot of writing, because this is where we take that personal inventory of ourselves. And some of the steps in that personal inventory were not that challenging for me, because they weren't really the nature of my problems. Talking about, things like harming, I was ready to admit a lot of that. But then my sponsor one day put a piece of paper in front of me that had the word, in big bold letters, fears, written over the top of it. Fears. He wanted me to write out all of my fears, big and small, on this piece of paper, and then talk to him about it. Talk to him about all my fears, all of these things that I was trying to suppress and push down and not acknowledge. He wanted me to write them all down. And so that was the first act of courage. That was me surrendering and saying, look, I just want to understand. And that was there was a significant power that came from this exercise, because, I had to have written down something like 200 fears on there, and there was a lot, but the power that came from this is that I named them. This was the first time I'd named them all. All of my fear, from the most ridiculous, like the fear of spiders, or the fear of talking to people that might reject me, to like the fear of dying, or the fear of infinity, or the fear of, some powerful things, like just the fear of failure. And when I named them, that in and of itself was a powerful healing process, because once we name it, then we can start to look at the other process, which is to build a relationship with it. It's like a very human relationship. Like, you for a lot of people, when they want to be heard, they scream, they get vocal, they want to be heard. And they start to feel calmer when they're acknowledged. Hey, I see you, right? It's the same with fear. And from that list of something like 200 fears that I had written on there were really, one of the most important things I noticed was there weren't most of the fears were not related to any kind of significant danger. Like, I was not afraid of things that, would like kill me or danger. And for those kinds of things, thank goodness fear is there. Thank goodness danger fear is there, so that we avoid the danger, right? We don't want to walk into a bear cave just out of sheer curiosity. But, most of what I had written on there, written on that page, were not danger fears. So what were they? Well, looking down this list, I noticed that there were really three core root problems to these non-danger fears that I would see. And the three things that they tended to anchor themselves to, these fears tended to anchor themselves to, were uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. Uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. Every single one of those fears could be fit into one of those categories or multiple categories or that sort of thing. But it really came down to those three core root fears that existed in me. Uncertainty meant that I was afraid of what to expect in an uncertain future, that I didn't know what I didn't know. And that lack of knowledge scared me because that was my control impulse, that I want to control everything. So if there's something I don't know about in the future, it's scary. And, a lot of times we don't know what's going to happen. We might have dreams. We might have goals. We might have aspirations, but we're not certain that we're going to make it. And naturally, that uncertainty makes life worth living a lot of ways because that makes it exciting. Otherwise, if we knew everything, how boring would this life be? But for me, I felt that uncertainty in such a powerful way that I was a little bit short-circuited. Because I knew that the uncertainty would lead to excitement, but I didn't want a lot of it in my life because I didn't want to. I feared that unknown. And I think a lot of us can get into that. Like we fear the uncertainty. So we avoid decisions or we avoid the things that we should be doing because they're uncertain. They're uncertain. It's uncertain that we'll make it. And then the second fear that I would feel more often was overwhelm. This was where there was just too much stacked on me, or I felt like the weight of the world was stacked on me. Like there was just too much. And, and so having all of that, weight of having too much to do in college, it was about the coursework. I couldn't keep up with all of the books because I read too slow, or, in work where I just had too much work going on, or I felt like I was neglecting things, that I just felt this massive amount of overwhelm, and that would lead to panic attacks. And then the final fear that I would feel was related to self-doubt. This is where it was like I just didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe that I could achieve things, or the dreams that I had were so far away that I couldn't even comprehend them from where I was at right now. And seeing those three fears in that way and naming them, understanding them and saying, okay, that's what the fear is telling me. That's the root cause of all of these different fears. If I can narrow them down into these three things, having it organized in that fashion made me see it differently, made me see it not as necessarily obstacles, but then I could start to be mindful about it. And if you remember what the definition of mindfulness is, it's really just curiosity and awareness. So I was aware of it. I named it, and that's what I had. So the second step was getting curious about it. Now I'm mindful about it. So getting curious about it was, well, how can I remove this as an obstacle? How can I change my relationship with this fear? If it's not going away, I may have fear of uncertainty. So how can I work with that? And a lot of that was, well, let's look at the uncertainty. Let's ask questions about the uncertainty. If you're experiencing uncertainty at any time about something that you want to pursue, and it's leading you to be indecisive or not moving in a particular direction, well, what's the remedy for that? Well, get certain. Start to do the things that help you get certain. And for me, this was not just getting certain, but also getting focused. Because if you can be uncertain about a lot of things that you might want to achieve, and then your focus will be diluted into those many things, and you will just not achieve a lot of things instead of focusing on the right things, the few right things that you want to focus on, and achieving those with greater certainty. So that was the first step. And that's where I started to feel like, over time, and this came much later once I was able to evaluate a lot of this stuff, but that when an idea hits you and you start to feel that fear of the uncertainty about it that rises up, and you feel that level of excitement about it that makes you just want to get up in the morning and pursue it, you have that equal measure of fear and excitement that results in that oh shit factor. And that's what I call it, the oh shit factor, is because when it happens, you say to yourself, oh shit, I better pursue this. And that's kind of that, at least that certainty that that's the thing you want to focus on. Now, how do you get certain about it? Well, that really comes down to just visualizing success in such a powerful way. In looking at when you feel that uncertainty about it, instead of dwelling in the uncertainty, flip the script and intentionally visualize yourself achieving that in the longer term. That's where you bring yourself, your present self, into the future of what you want to be. And then you could take that future self and bring it to where you're at now and start living it out. This is a concept that Benjamin Hardy outlines in a lot of his work, including Be Your Future Self Now, which is another book, a great book of his. And then you could start to feel more certain. And yes, and you can also accept the fact that things are never going to be certain. There's never going to be a direct and completely clear path to your goals. That's where you start to have to be comfortable in the discomfort of the uncertainty and start to embrace it as something more powerful. Start to redefine it in your mind. But once you name it, then you can have that script flipped. Now, the first step in changing that mindset is to name it. Then you can start to see those particular fears, uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt as opportunity. So when you see that, when you start to experience that uncertainty, you're like, okay, great. This is an opportunity that I'm pushing past my comfort zone. Because every single one of these fears, these non-danger fears that I call opportunity fears, they represent a point in time that you're feeling that you're just pushing up against the edge of your comfort zone, that you've reached the edge of your current knowledge, your current capacity, or your current belief system. You've reached the edge of it, and now you're pushing against the edge of it. And the alarm bells in your mind are going off and saying, hey, wait a second. This is unknown territory. I'm overwhelmed, and I don't believe that I can do it. All three of those things, those firing at once. That's a signal to you that's a signal that you might just want to push a little bit further. And you don't have to push a lot further. You just have to push just a small amount further, because a little bit past that comfort zone is where growth occurs. That's all you need. If you push way, way too far, the bubble's going to pop and you're going to get burned out because you're going to do too much. And that's one of the mistakes that we fall into, is that if we're afraid of heights, we might immediately jump to the idea as like, well, I need to go skydiving, and I'm not going to go skydiving. So you scare yourself out of it before you have a chance to build up to that level. But maybe if instead of jumping straight to skydiving, if you're afraid of heights, you can buy a 6-foot ladder and you could safely climb the ladder. And you could stand up there and say, okay, this is expanding my comfort zone. Or then you can get in a plane, or you can do the things that build you up. I still don't have much of a desire to go skydiving. So that's not something that I need to overcome, because it's not necessarily an opportunity fear for me. It's a healthy fear, and you may call it healthy, you may not, but we have the freedom to actually choose those definitions. So when we're feeling that overwhelm and when we're feeling that self-doubt, that's where just that little bit beyond our comfort zone consistently comes into play. And I've mentioned it before with my 80%, 5% rule. This is where you want to approach those moments by, instead of giving 110% or giving everything you have all of the time, just give 80% consistently. 80%. That gives you the capacity for rest, for recovery, for building up. And over time, you're going to build your capacity so that your 80% will eventually become everyone else's 110%. Furthermore, if you're pushing 5%, just 5% beyond your comfort zone, instead of swan diving way past your comfort zone, just 5% beyond your comfort zone helps it to grow over time. Our courage and our comfort zones grow consistently 5% at a time. So those are the ways in which you can flip the script on fear and turn it from an obstacle into an opportunity. Because I'll tell you that when you're feeling those things, when the alarm bells are going off in your mind and you're feeling uncertainty in your mind, or you're feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of your dreams and you're doubting whether or not you can achieve it, that's your signal that you're onto something. That's the signal that you're pushing right up against the edge of your comfort zone. And if you push just a little bit further, you're going to grow one step closer to your dream. And before you know it, if you do that consistently, before you know it, the next step to your dream, that next 5% step beyond your comfort zone, will be the paradise you were hoping for. So look at those fears, look at those opportunity fears as opportunities, and flip the script on it. And you'll find yourself getting closer to your dreams with consistent effort. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.